everyone. Welcome to a special episode of Geeks Not Nerds. I'm Captain Logan.
And I'm Brandon.
Hi, Brandon.
Hi, Cap.
Brandon, I brought you on today because I want to talk a little bit about one of your very favorite things.
Okay.
Back to the Future.
Yay!
And, I don't know, Back to the Future been on my mind a lot lately because last year, of course, was the big anniversary and a lot of cool Back to the Future stuff has been coming out. We did.
We went back.
We went back. And you and I did a how we felt about the documentary, which was pretty fun.
Indeed.
And we are, sometime in the not-so-distant future, going to tackle the Back to the Future Telltale game. I just got it. It's right here, in fact.
That's awesome.
We're going to finally deal with that at some point. And we also been talking about doing the animated series at some point.
Yeah, we started it. We didn't get very far.
We started it before they released it. We were watching it on some website that had it.
I still need to get that. I know I did that in the recommends.
The only reason we haven't started talking yet is about it yet on cameras because I haven't bought it yet.
We definitely, when we do that, we want to watch it via the whatever you call it, mastered or transferred.
I just want to look at it better, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
But anyway, today, I had a question for you, Brandon, and we're going to do that irritating thing where we get into and dissect a little bit the time travel and Back to the Future.
All right. It's not so irritating for me, though.
Yeah, but
I love this stuff.
It is for some people, because, I have to talk about time travel a lot with some of the superhero TV shows we're dealing with and stuff, and sometimes, exactly. People will be like, Captain Logan, it's a conceit, it doesn't make sense. But the problem is, you'll build a set of rules and then you'll break them, and of course it's a conceit. There's not a particular way time travel would have to work, at least yet, because if it is even a thing you could do, we don't know how it would work exactly yet. So you do by and large have to treat it like a conceit and have kind of a set of arbitrary rules, but you have to be consistent with them or make it vague enough where the time travel is not the important thing. You know what I mean? And so you can use that as a conceit to kind of facilitate just going back in time and dealing with a thing, or going forward in time and dealing with a thing. But when the rules matter, then it's hard not to question them because it's too easy to just write yourself out of a hole. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And so that becomes an issue. People have called Back to the Future one of the smartest and most sophisticated movies in its time travel, and I would say there's not a great deal of competition. Where like there's a lot of time travel movies that just handle that very, very poorly.
Right.
And I also think that folks are right that it is one of the better ones, certainly. But I think that Zemeckis and Gale wrote themselves into a corner at the end of Back to the Future, of course, not knowing, we've talked about this before, not knowing they were going to do a sequel, and deciding that they wanted to play it like it was a trilogy all along. And I'm not saying that they pretended like that was the plan, they just decided to play it like that. And so they decided to have the next movie happen directly after the first one. So now we have Doc Brown telling Marty that he's got to go to the future to deal with his kids, and we never thought we'd actually dramatize that. Yeah. We had no plans to make a story about that, and that is in fact, and I think this is smart, not the story they're telling. They use that as the beginning first act to set up what the conflict is going to be. So the movie is not about they go to the future. The movie is that's the starting point, and then it's more about the alternate present that they deal with.
And then can we also talk about the fact that Back to the Future Part 3, which was filmed at the same time as 2, basically retcons that at the end by saying the future doesn't matter. So when they even go to the future in 2, they filmed the end of 3, and it really didn't matter to go change the future because it hadn't happened yet, and that Marty should just remember in the future.
That's right. Now, to be fair, you could treat it like, and I've thought of that too, you could treat it like Doc Brown just didn't know that yet.
That's true, but you can't have to go there ignore the fact that Doc Brown figures that out and then still decides, since he's living in the past, that he wants to go forward to see Marty again.
And at that point, we're talking about relative presence, where
exactly.
the future that is Clara's future would matter to Doc Brown because it is his present, and then it becomes
the past.
And then it becomes kind of this arbitrary thing, and it becomes almost this kind of metaphysical question, right?
Right.
Where it's like, okay, I guess the future only matters if it is your present. And you're trying to...
It's part of your timeline.
And then it becomes almost the selfish thing where because if the future doesn't matter, then why are you concerned about making sure that history works in any particular way, especially because you can change anything, and even though Doc Brown is afraid of paradoxes that will blow up the space-time continuum, they seem to never happen. It seems like you can do anything you want to, and that's not going to happen.
It might be, though, that since we live linearly, even though he's jumped back in time, the future to where he is in time is still his past linearly.
Right, sure.
Because he's instantaneously changing time but still moving forward.
Oh, that's right.
Even though that might make it all worthwhile.
Well, why do you say that, though? Because then, again, it's just kind of a selfish thing at that point.
It is, but that might be what ties everything together. I just came up with that. And
I don't know how. What do you mean by that? Why would that tie it all together?
Well, he says that the future doesn't matter in so much as that the future you haven't experienced yet.
Right.
So the future that they had experienced, which is their past, then becomes the driving nature of why you wouldn't want to change that.
But I guess the question then is, what would be your modus operandi for trying to keep a timeline consistent? At that point, it doesn't have anything to do with time is supposed to be a certain way. It has to do with it's always personal, right? And if you think about it, the first Back to the Future film...
Back to the Future 4, it's always personal.
It's entirely about a personal thing for Marty. Yeah. Where he's got to make sure his parents meet so he's born, not to ultimately... not because we're afraid of some sort of a paradox that would blow up the space-time continuum.
True.
And so, yeah, I mean, what you're saying might, have there might be a degree of logic there. Here's my question.
Okay.
I mean, that's all really interesting. Here's my question. I don't understand how you could go to the future with the rules established in Back to the Future. And by the way, Star Trek time travel's like this too. I don't know, in a lot of time travels like this. In a world where you can change the past at all. I don't understand how you could go to the future and meet yourself.
This video is going to be shorter than we gave it credit for being, and I'll tell you why.
Well, I have another question later on too. But go ahead.
Good.
Yeah,
because when
because we got to stretch this out to a whole.
When
video.
I just formulated my hypothesis just now that you said was really interesting, it basically brought me onto the same page as you in the question you just asked.
Okay.
And here's why.
Yeah.
Because you have stated basically that when you jump to the future. And we've talked about this a little bit before.
It takes you out of the timeline.
It takes you out of the timeline.
And we know that just to establish what we're talking about, for folks that haven't thought about it, hold that thought. Because I feel like we should provide a little bit of context in case people aren't with us. In the first Back to the Future film, you take yourself out of the timeline, you go back in time. If you go back to the present where you were, there's not two of you.
Right.
If you go back to 10 minutes before you left, like Marty does, or a couple minutes, there's two of you because you haven't gone back yet. So if we take that rule as a consistent rule, then when you show back up when you show back up to the present, let's say you even came like 10 minutes after you left, then you don't exist for 10 minutes in that particular part of the timeline.
That's how I came onto your.
And
that's how I came onto your side.
Yeah, and Brandon and I have talked about this before, but I wanted to do it on camera.
Absolutely.
And suggest this and see if other people have theories about it, because both Marty and Jennifer have this, where they go to the future, and they still exist in that timeline, and they have been there the whole time. So how suddenly were there two of them? Because then, that means that when the Marty that goes back to the future at the beginning of the movie does it from Marty's perspective again at the end. You're with me. When Marty from 1955 comes back to the present and sees himself go back in time, and then he goes to the future right after that with Doc Brown when he shows up right after they see the truck.
Then he leaves immediately.
Where did the other Marty that we see in the future come from?
See, okay, this
because the one that comes back. Now you could argue, well, but the one that left comes back, but that's the one we've seen.
Right.
I know it's loopy, but that's the one we've seen. Right?
Okay. I had originally argued on this point was that just proves that you made it back, but it being that when you go backward in time,
out of the timeline again.
But this is how I came onto your side. Why my original argument is bunk, is because when you take yourself out of the timeline to go back, You don't continue existing in the future. If you had gotten killed in the past time, or you lived out your entire life in the past time, you would cease to exist from a forward momentum.
From the place where you went back in the first place.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
so you can go back in time and live your whole life that way if you want to.
But that's exactly why Doc Brown disappeared from the timeline.
And he did.
In Part 3.
So it's inconsistent.
Yeah.
Because he leaves and we never see him again.
He leaves and he goes into the past and he never shows up again.
Or rather, that
dies at the hands
of
Buford Tannen, and he's not there. There'd be no Doc Brown for him to go back to in the future. So that's why Doc Brown makes it explicit in the letter, don't come back for me. There's going to be no Doc Brown in the future.
Yeah.
And there isn't.
To be fair, they do it because they're stuck with it. But it becomes a problem.
But it does make sense.
It becomes a problem with 1 before it's a problem with 2. And 2 just exacerbates or uses it. You know what I mean? And basically uses it as a conceit. Well, he said you're in the future, so we go to the... But I guess the deal is... Okay,
well, there's still no problem with
thing.
1, though. Because 1 is its own compact story, and that makes sense because we didn't go to the future in 1. Marty comes back just slightly overlapping his time.
Basically,
so the only thing that happens is that Marty is about a week older than he started.
Let me suggest this. So, what should have happened, just to make sense, and again, then you'd have a totally different movie. And understand, I love how the sort of post-apocalyptic present happens. But the thing is, that's the alternate timeline thing, the diagram, the going from one timeline and jumping to another one, and all of that. That is what is often pointed to as what makes these movies so sophisticated about time travel, because we hadn't had that a lot yet. And this is the movie that breaks it because you can't go to your own future and you be there. So here's what should have happened. You're right. Now that I'm thinking about it. Doc Brown going to the future in 1 and seeing Marty's future isn't a problem because he hasn't done that yet. What should have happened is he comes back and Doc Brown isn't thinking fourth dimensionally. Doc Brown should come to Marty and he should say, and also just the idea that he's not thinking enough about how changing the past manipulates the present. It's weird that he would even think that there's any reason that they would need to go to a future to change a thing. Why not just go back and tell Marty, hey, don't be stupid with your kids?
Right.
Why doesn't he even think about it that way?
The whole logic of you don't want to know too much about your future, you could really screw it up.
Right. So I guess the only thing you can assume is that he is making the assumption that time is supposed to be more linear than it is, and that I don't know maybe he can't be sure that if you change a thing in the past it would affect the future. But then the problem is we already saw it happen. He knows that, or at least he knows that you can fix a thing and make sure that it happens the right way. That's neither here nor there. Here's the thing: what should have happened. Let me get back to this. Is that Doc Brown should have grabbed Marty, gone back to the future, and it should have been an entirely different future than what he experienced in the first place. That's what should have happened.
That may be. Right? However, it may lead credence because we talked.
Because he took him out of the timeline.
Yes,
and by the way,
true.
I've seen this in a lot of things. I think I like to point to a lot, and this is also a parody of things and making fun of stuff. But there's a Powerpuff Girls episode that does it, where they speed too fast, and other things have done this. I just like to point to this because it's a fun example. The Powerpuff Girls fly too fast playing tag or something, and it's a him episode, and they wind up in the future, and it's this really scary, twisted, ominous, creepy future, and him is running everything because the Powerpuff Girls weren't there to protect their city, and they took themselves out of the timeline. And I don't understand how that doesn't happen in the Back to the Future.
And it should, because now that you're saying it the way that you're saying it, and I'm almost in complete agreement. I'm
sure I'm not the only person that's ever said this, but I haven't heard a lot of people talk about this aspect of it, so I thought we'd make a video.
I'm still
if
trying
it's redundant, then sorry, but
still trying to wrap my head around whether or not I can convince myself to go back to how I felt before we've logicked this out.
Because you didn't think I was right about it in the first place.
Here's the thing, that when Doc Brown goes to the future, and he meets Marty in the future, and he meets his kids in the future, and he finds us out about the future, that makes sense because Marty's back square where he started, and he can go to the future. He can live out his life and go to the future.
Right, that would have happened because he left him there.
Right.
Because he's there. So now
but we have no idea.
He's gone. They would have gone to an alternate future, just like the alternate present in the middle of 2.
And this is why the explanation then makes sense for that, but doesn't make sense for this. So we have no idea that since Doc has jumped into the future, but now Doc has experienced a portion of the future that now exists in Doc's linear past. Okay? So Doc experienced that. That exists in his past as something that he traveled forward through time
that he
during an
experienced
experience.
it, but that doesn't mean that timeline as a thread still exists or that you can go back to it.
It doesn't.
Again, that's when it gets kind of metaphysical.
Right, but here's the thing.
But you have memories of a thing that didn't actually physically happen because you changed it to where it never happened, but it did happen because, as Nero says in Star Trek 09, I was there, it happened, don't tell me it didn't happen.
At that point, when Doc goes to the future, we don't have any idea whether we assume that Doc didn't actually have an encounter with Marty in the future. Even though Marty says, look me up.
Why would it make a difference if he did?
It would make a difference because of this. When they do go to the future, and they're going at the same time that the stuff happened, we never see an alternate Doc from the first time he went have any interaction with Marty. And it's all at the same time that it happens.
That's a really good question, is would that happen and could you treat... I gotta noodle this.
Doc should be avoiding himself from the first time he was there. And that never happens. Because Doc was there during the events that happened.
No, but here's the thing. I'm not convinced that it's like the past where you would see yourself. I mean, I hadn't really thought about it like that. Like it's a...
But it is because Marty comes back to the future and he sees himself.
No, I know that, but that's in the past. Like is it not always an alternate future just by virtue of the fact that it hasn't technically happened yet? Well, I don't know. Like I've never seen anything do that. I don't think where.
But there lies the problem, because then if you go to the past, the future hasn't technically happened yet. So you could never get back to your present.
So that I can noodle this, let me set this up for a second. So the idea you're suggesting is that Doc Brown goes into the future, and if he comes back and gets Marty and goes back to the future, and the assumption is that nothing was altered, then there would be a him there because he had been there before, even though it hasn't happened yet. And you're saying that the logic would be the same as going back in time, because the idea is that you have a linear timeline that stays that way unless you change something.
Well,
I never thought of that.
Linear timeline
and I don't know about it.
The linear timeline exists within the person that experienced it.
That's a Doctor Who thing.
That's
I don't think
say,
that's what we're talking about here.
That's just one thing that I used to think. What you have said kind of changes my opinion, because once he comes back and pulls Marty out of the timeline...
But give me a second. Let's be careful, because it can't be just one person's linear time. I was thinking of it that way, as like inside a person's head, where like what they remember versus what actually happens. But the way you're talking about it, it's like you have different strings for different people. That doesn't work when you have multiples of people in the past.
No, what I'm suggesting is that because it was experienced makes it factual until something is changed. But what you have suggested is that by Marty removing himself from the timeline would change that.
Out, so
this means that the future they go back to should have been drastically different, and that's where Back to the Future gets it wrong.
Well, let me suggest this. Is it not possible that Doc Brown, even if you're right and he could still... I never thought of that. Even if you're right, and that's blowing my mind, and I'm thinking I'm going to turn the camera off, and half an hour later I'm going to totally figure out why that doesn't work. But maybe it doesn't. You're right. I don't know.
Well, we're just noodling here.
Well, yeah. That's the whole point of this. Let me suggest this: is it not possible that he goes? Give me a second.
Oh, you're fine.
Okay. Let me suggest this. He could have originally gone to a later date in the first place than they go into. He could have gone to a later date, seen the newspaper, and then gone back in time, and then they get there days before he ever arrived, and then he wouldn't meet himself. Because we don't know when exactly he was there.
That is true.
And we don't know if he actually saw it happen. He just has a newspaper, and we don't know if he was there that whole duration. He could have shown up the day that the newspaper was printed,
which is the day after they were there.
Which is the day after they were there.
That is true.
So he might not have actually... And then they wouldn't meet themselves. So I guess that's possible, but that's...
Because
we don't know that.
He does go about 30 years into the future, so yeah, that could be absolutely... And I considered that, but we didn't get to it a minute ago, and you saying it brought it back up again. So I'm kind of with you. He could have gone... He probably did... Well, he had to have gone to the later date to get the paper. Number one.
He wouldn't have had to go there. He could have been there that whole time, and then left after he got the paper. He could have. He could have been there the whole time.
But
he would have had to go to that date. He would have been there the whole time.
I'm saying if he was there the whole time, that's when he would have looked Marty up in the future. So the likelihood is that he probably did. He was probably there weeks after this incident happened. Had contact with Marty. Found out about this incident that happened. Because Marty told him.
Or it's possible, because you're basing all this on a line of dialogue, it's also possible that he saw the newspaper and decided not to even deal with Marty.
You're right.
And just took the paper and went back in time. Now, we know that he was there for a while and did things, so it's also possible that he didn't deal with Marty at all, I guess, and they wouldn't have run into each other because he was off getting his face redone and living it up and stuff.
You know what else?
And just because Marty says "look me up" doesn't mean he did that beyond seeing where he was. It doesn't mean he actually interacted with him.
You know
and he never says anything about interacting. Although, no, you know what though? Oh no, I'm totally wrong about something.
Okay.
He knows too much. He knows stuff that can't be in that newspaper because he says exactly when Marty Jr. is supposed to meet Griff at the.
He spied on him already.
He spied on him already.
So we should see him somewhere spying on him, and him having to avoid himself.
Unless somehow or rather, going to the future isn't the same as going to the past, where you wouldn't be in the timeline because it hasn't happened yet for you. Where like. And then I'm just not sure. We're like, okay, in the past, that's a thing that has happened already. Right. The future technically hasn't, even if you went to the future and saw it. But then why would it be relative from where you leave?
But
just
that doesn't
because,
make sense.
Yeah,
because if you go to the past,
I never thought of that.
From when you're in the past, the future hasn't happened yet. When you're in the past,
but it has.
But that's what I was saying.
No, I know
that it happened for him.
Yeah.
So. That would be the defining factor, but it doesn't make sense. You've just blown something completely out of the water here.
No.
Doc Brown comes back at the end of one. He's like, we got to do something about your kids. He's frantic. He's in a time machine. There's no hurry about it. That's 30 years away.
No, I know, and I've always thought that.
And I'm just like, what?
So let me ask you the other question. And once again,
yes.
It's a
if
thing.
If you have any ideas,
it's a thing where
please let us know.
It's fun to speculate about. You're almost always going to have some sort of inconsistencies with time travel because any way you slice it, it's always tough to. It's always tough to buy like leaving your timeline and then coming back and all of that even happening in the first place without your disappearing or something. There's always a paradox. And so time travel just doesn't work in the first place in a lot of ways. And so like, it's a fun thing to talk about, but like, I'm not dogging on it too much, for that. But let me ask you this question.
I got one more thing to say. I figured out a thought experiment.
Yep.
One of two things. Well, we'll never know for sure until we actually time travel. If it ever even becomes possible.
Because my theory on actual time travel would be if you went to the past, the version of you that tried to go back would just cease to exist in the first place.
That could be.
I think that's more likely than anything because the fact that you left.
You exist apart from time then. Well,
I'm just thinking that like you have the paradox of things have to happen. You are changing things, but you're not born yet. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so, like, the thing that made you exist in the first place hasn't happened yet, so how can you even exist in the past?
There's a theory in time travel that you would not be able to time travel to before you were born.
Because of that problem.
Right, because of that problem.
But anyway, I'm sorry, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, though, that it now...
Sorry.
Yeah, no, what was I saying?
I didn't mean to make you lose your train of thought.
No, that's okay, but what I was... Wow, I completely lost.
I think you said something about my messing up something.
No.
Blowing something out of the water, or did we get past that already?
We got past that.
Okay.
Go ahead and ask the next question, I'll remember it.
I apologize.
That's okay, I'll remember it.
I felt like I had to say that to get
No,
where
and that's
going.
good.
I apologize.
That's good, but there was something about pulling yourself out of the timeline that I was thinking about, and it related to the fact that you didn't need all this time because you're in a freaking time machine.
Right.
Oh, here's what it was.
Okay, go ahead.
It was if, say, you or me or anybody wanted to appear in the future living the way we do now in the 21st century, just moving through time as we do, what would you do? Would you hide yourself from the public eye, never see anybody, just be a recluse, and then one day just in the future just pop out and just be like, I'm here?
Yeah.
Well, you're removing yourself. You don't exist for that period of time.
Right.
That's kind of a today, a regular time moving allegory. So I think you're right. If you just wanted to appear in the future, you'd remove yourself and then appear in the future. People don't know if you're dead. This is an extreme example, but people wouldn't know if you're dead, if you're a recluse, or what happened to him.
Well, I always wondered with Doc Brown was how he got himself legal again.
Right?
Like, how did he get his paperwork?
But keep in mind, this is also the
that.
man who had money for different time periods. You know, he's
That's
not exactly
true,
the most legal person. He's got documents. He shows us the documents in part 1. He's like, I got money documents.
No, I get that, but it's harder in the future because you've got the key cards and everything. Like
they would recognize this thumbprint as ancient.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. So I don't know how that would work, and it seems like because they do this kind of
social thumbprint replant.
They do this kind of social satire thing where you do have a little bit of a Big Brother thing, and you don't seem to have the privacy that you do.
Oh, how spot on they were!
All of that, yeah. But anyway, so here's my other question. Okay,
yes.
The original Back to the Future does not take butterfly effect into account. Because when you get to the end of part of that first movie, and you do this for the sake of telling a simple story, and I mean it's a really good story, so I'm not begrudging them this, but I think it's interesting. This is one of those things that like came to me in the shower one day, and I went, oh yeah, I guess that wouldn't work. Or if it does work, it's really unlikely. The Marty that goes back in time after the timeline has been changed. You know where I'm going with this.
I do know where you're going with this.
And you've thought about this before.
Uh-huh.
And we know that things have been changed even for that Marty, because when he comes into the present, subtle things have changed, like Twin Pine Mall to the Lone Pine Mall, because we saw him break that tree or run that tree.
Pine! Old man Peabody.
My pine! So anyway,
Arrows from space.
Riddle me this: how are we supposed to buy that Marty McFly is at precisely the same place at that mall, or exactly the same time and place, in an alternate timeline where his parents are drastically different, have a different sort of social status, now I've always thought it was funny that the kids still live at home when one of them has a desk job.
I always wear a suit to the office,
and you're like, why do you live at home? You know, stuff like that is really funny. But why? But here's the thing. Marty McFly's, he would have a slightly different, or maybe very different, personality and outlook and worldview even.
Not only that, but his parents' class have changed. They're more successful. They wouldn't be living there.
But the class is what is important to his. This is what matters about it, Brandon. They're being more confident would change the way he is. Which means I don't buy that he is at exactly the same place and time that night with Doc Brown, because he would be a different person from the person we know, and it would just that would butterfly effect. That would change your timeline. It would make you go in different places likely.
Except Doc knows all about the future. Doc looked him up
make
on
sure
purpose.
that he was there. Yeah,
Doc,
and
that's the cyclical idea of their friendship.
And the good thing about it is that he saw a videotape and he saw timestamps, so he would know exactly when to have him there and stuff. However, and this is getting kind of nitpicky, but we do know that he, at least because we're recycling footage, yells the same thing to the Libyans and says bastards. So like he's at least doing some of the exact same thing.
That's true, but you could also say this is a case
that might be okay.
This is a case where we know this to have happened, so there's but this also breaks down the whole reason for Back to the Future Part 1. If you say that it already happened, so this makes the case for it must happen, then going back in time wouldn't change that. But the fact that Marty went back in time and then almost changed his own existence throws that out of the water.
What I'd love to know.
It's inconsistent on those two fronts.
What I'd love to know, and if I were going to write one of the issues of the comics right now that are filling in gaps, this is the one I would write.
Okay.
Would be the Doc Brown that has to manipulate things to make sure that he and Marty even meet in the first place. Because I don't buy... Now, we don't know... In the movies, they did this in the comics, but whatever. We don't know, in movie canon, exactly what it was that led them to become friends in the first place, and the way the comics did it, it had a lot to do with the insecurities that he has because of his upbringing that even leads him to Doc Brown in the first place. So, now, again, that's... Zemeckis or Gale can consider that canon or whatever. I'm sure a lot of people wouldn't. But the point I'm making is, I don't know if that person would necessarily meet Doc Brown if he didn't have those same insecurities and had a different sort of upbringing.
What if Doc Brown's been working behind the scenes for 30 years?
That's what I'm saying.
Right, but there's a vague line where he says he spent his entire family fortune on this. Maybe he's also spending money on making sure that things happen the way they're supposed to so he can meet Marty in the first place.
But then the question is, why would that be that important to him? I mean, like...
Because it saves his own life at some point.
The problem with that, though, is that he could save his life by just not building the time machine.
That's true.
And
but
you could say, well,
that worked.
And then you could say, well, he has to build the time machine in order for Marty to go back in time in the first place. But the problem with that is... It's already happened regardless of whether it happens the second time, right?
And that would just make another split in the timeline.
And then the question is just how would the paradoxes work?
Right, that would just make a split in the timeline like we saw in Back to the Future Part 2.
It breaks your brain, but I'm just saying, I have a hard time buying it would happen exactly the same way, but I do like the idea that maybe Doc Brown would have to manipulate things to make sure that all worked, even though I don't necessarily know why he would feel the need to unless he just... wanted to make sure that he and Marty were friends and stuff, but I don't know. But anyway, that's all I wanted to talk about.
Yeah, it works for me.
Those are my questions, Brandon.
You've given me more questions than answers, though. Now I'll have to noodle this.
Sorry. The wonderful thing is, those are really good, simple. I mean, they're complicated in the sci-fi part, but the time travel stuff. But they're really good, simple character stories, and none of that ruins what I love about them.
The first thing I'm going to try to do to understand this, I want you to know...
Are you whispering because you don't want the people at home?
No, I'm going to invest time in understanding this, but the first thing I'm going to do to try to understand this...
is watch the animated series.
No.
Because that will be so helpful.
I'm going to go home and hang a clock in my bathroom. And maybe I'll come up with a revelation.
Are you going
to... And that's how I invented my timeline theory for Back to the Future.
You come up with a flux capacitor, and then you can go back in time.
The flux explainer.
And you come up with the flux capacitor. You build your own time machine, and then you go back. I mean, it's not. Unfortunately, it's not a DeLorean. It's just it's
a Datsun, actually.
That crappy car you have outside.
No, not that. No, it's a 280ZX.
Oh, okay. But anyway, so then I was just imagining your car as a time machine.
Yeah, it's a '96 Honda Accord 4-banger.
Accord, yeah. And then you go back in time and you ask all these questions to Bob Zemeckis while he's writing the script. And then he's like, I don't know. I just wanted to write a story about a dude that goes back in time and dates his own mom. What do you want from me?
Speaking of Bob Zemeckis, I will say this. I got that paper. I got the USA Today.
You got a paper from Bob Zemeckis?
Now, I got that USA Today that they put out in honor of the anniversary, and I was so excited, and I've got it, and I was going to display it, but then you made a great point about it, is that half the paper is most of what you see in the movie with the top stuff. But then at the bottom, they did this really tongue-in-cheek stuff that they just redid the bottom of the paper and made part about Zemeckis and like how people are dumb for believing fake news. And it was really on the nose.
I didn't like that, yeah.
I don't like it either.
And fourth wall breaking.
Since then, I've just kept it in the same envelope it came in. I haven't got it back out again.
It looks cool. I mean, like hang it.
It does.
But I would still hang it. I mean,
the bottom
it's
of the
neat,
paper is changed from the movie.
The meta stuff isn't is not as clever as it's pretending like it is, because it's talking about Back to the Future on, but like play the whole thing straight. Pretend like it's all from that time period.
It should have been the full front page for the movie.
Because you started reading some of it to me, and I was like, really? That's what we did with it?
The problem is that they took this thing from 85, and against all the things
did you not feel like
foretold,
while you were reading that, like somebody was just nudging you the whole time?
But against all the things that they foretold in the movies were just negated by the fact that they went with modern day premises and memes to do the bottom half of that paper.
Precisely, yeah.
And that just negated the whole novelty factor of the thing.
So you even got a review of a newspaper today.
Anyway, USA Today.
Everybody...
yesteryear.
Thanks as always for watching. Hope you enjoyed today's special episode of Geeks Not Nerds, and we will be back with you again sometime in the near future. Be sure, Brandon and I, I'm sure, obviously you'll have another Geeks Not Nerds here in a few days. Leave your comments and let us know what you think about all this wacky time travel stuff we're talking about.
Please do.
And also, if there's something you'd like to see me and Dan, or me and Brandon, or me and anybody else talk about in the future episode, leave those in the comments as well. And Brandon, thanks for joining me.
No problem.
It was
thanks
fun.
For having me.
And we'll see you again very shortly here on Geekvolution. I'm Captain Logan.
And I'm Brandon the Nerd.
Oh, and then you have to say, reminding you to support your local comic book store. There you go. Congratulations. Yeah, good job. We'll see you next time. Thanks, guys.